What's up, the internet? It's me, it's Kyle, and I am joined once again on this part 2 of our Pride celebration by Miss Jena. We are the voices behind the camera so often, but we are in front of the camera today because this is important to us. This is our Pride weekend, or our Pride month kickoff celebration, and we are joined by another great member of the community and another very important person to our event. And I will tell you why here momentarily. But let me bring on Andy Mangels. Andy, how you doing?
Hey guys, how are you?
Very good. Let me do the thing. There we go. So
everybody
can see that.
Suddenly
You
I'm
wanted everybody to see the background.
Bigger, apparently.
Well,
I am obsessed with your background.
Right. I got a white wall. Jenna's at work, and you've got Boba Fett in the background. So we probably should start.
I mean, you win. I mean,
Right.
I've got, other people, but whatever.
You got a Starbuck back there. You've not Starbuck, but a Starbuck.
You know what's great is for every show we move him around to have him like peeking at us to see, where's he going to be this time? Well, I'm blocking him this time.
Right. He's the original Starbuck before he became plural.
Really? Huh. Sorry.
That was an attempt at a dad joke, okay?
Oh, okay.
And I think she fell for it.
I did.
Yeah.
I'm going, wait a minute.
So I was like,
what just happened?
On live TV.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, I would show you guys the friend that I have here, but he's kind of terrifying.
Oh, okay.
Show me. I want to see it now.
Ah!
we have a cursed pirate Kermit over here too that shows up in our shows sometimes too, and a snake, a plushy snake.
He's not gonna stay in place.
I don't think I have anything terrifying here. No pictures of.
Oh, and then we have
the ex-president.
I don't know, but that Wonder Woman behind you looks like she could kill me.
Yeah.
She wouldn't though. She would love you. She would accept you.
She looks angry though.
It's what drew me to Wonder Woman as a character was that she was unlike all the other superheroes. She was a character that was born of love, and that was her mission. Her mission was love and peace and truth, and that's a whole different mission than everybody else who's there to punish and fight.
Yeah,
it's true. So let's start here, Andy, because most people who are watching us probably don't know. Tell us your origin story. How did you come to be where you are?
The journey was actually aided by a couple of other people in the comics industry who came in about the same time as I did. I was growing up a little kid in Montana, a very small town called Big Fork, and I wanted to be a comic book artist, and was actually I started college at 16, a couple years early, and went to was training to become a comic book artist. And I was in a Teen Titans fan club with a couple of guys named Rob Liefeld and Hank Knauts. And they heard that Fantagraphics was putting out a book in 1985 called Focus on George Perez. And I was a bit of a expert on George, and so they suggested I contact them and see if I could write something for it. And I did, and that became my first published work as a writer. And I started writing regularly for Amazing Heroes magazine, which was one of the early great comic fan magazines, and then transitioned from that to Wizard and Hero Illustrated and Fantasia and a couple dozen different magazines, and then online. But in the meantime, I developed myself as a writer, and also got to know lots of comic artists and comic writers and comic editors. And that led to my writing in the comic book field. And eventually it was an article on where are we? There we go. On Boba Fett there, that I wrote an article on Boba Fett for Star Wars Magazine. which I had gotten the job for by writing a Jason Goes to Hell Friday the 13th comic for Topps. And the editor called me up one day and said, "Hey, Lucy Wilson at Lucasfilm wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh!" And they offered me my first book contract, which was a Star Wars book.
Oh.
And so, each step kind of led to something else. My writing for fanzines led to writing for comics. My continued writing for fanzines led to my first book. I've now written over 20 books and 3 bestsellers and so forth. And one of my books was on the history of animation and animation on DVD. And that led to me becoming a DVD producer. And I produced about 40 different DVD sets and documentaries and things like that. So kind of like my career, I always say it's the intersection of comics and Hollywood. And the last big comic I wrote, which was for Dynamite, was Wonder Woman Meets the Bionic Woman. And that's a perfect example of talk about comics meets Hollywood,
Oh my goodness.
And that was kind of born of my love for Wonder Woman, but also the Bionic Woman.
So,
Nice.
comics meets Hollywood's is a place that everybody seems to be living right now, but you've been there a long time.
Yeah.
Like you were there before it was cool.
Right.
So
this is gray hair. I know I look spectacularly young, but yeah, I've been in the at this particular intersection for 30 years with my connections in Hollywood. And what's funny is that everybody thinks I live in Hollywood because I'm so connected down there. But I go there often, but even in the olden days, pre-computers, I really high phone bills where I would be getting the right information. I won't say spreading the right rumors because unlike a lot of internet sites, at that point I was one of the few, if not the only person who was reporting on comics in Hollywood. And so unless I could source it from actual immediate, like people working on a project, I didn't repeat rumors. And plus back then, the projects were a lot less numerous. I mean, now you've got TV shows on comics. There's 19 of them a week, one a year.
Yeah. And so I guess my question is, as it relates to this, is how has that, obviously you just mentioned some of it, but how has it changed over the years? Do you see more people entering the comic book field with an eye towards, the movie and film and DVDs and multimedia production, or do you see it the other way where Hollywood is going more out to these people going, hey, we're looking for IP?
That's really where, I mean, it is both of those things you just mentioned, but Hollywood is really looking at comics as a farm where they can have creatures or food that is grown that they can then slaughter and use the carcass, or cook or eat. That's really, comic books are. Every producer now has somebody on their staff who is, connected to the comic scene and is feeding them, like, here's this trade paperback, here's that one, etc. And
there's so much.
I'm sorry.
There's just so much to.
There is.
There's so much.
Most of the creators that I know, the first thing on their minds once they get, especially creator-owned projects, is which producer could I send this to in the hopes of getting a television series? And and there are creators that I've been involved with that I'm like, as soon as you get this project, go and I'll send this that producer, and because that's where the money is. There's pitiful pennies in comics for a creator. But if you can get something going in Hollywood, that's where you're going to actually make money, and people will actually care. It's interesting that out in the the quote unquote real world, I tell people I work in the comic field, and their first thought is Avengers, Marvel movie Avengers, not not comic book Avengers. They know they came from comics, but they don't have a sense as to what comics mean in that realm.
Yeah. I love turning on Netflix and seeing things like October Faction, Jupiter Legacy, like all the other side things too that are just coming up like so big. I'm so excited to see. Hopefully someday get like an Ice Cream Man, or some of my other like maybe Stray Dogs will come up. So it's just that whole side world that's coming alive now. I'm so excited to see more of.
Well, I'm consistently amazed at the amount of content that is being done like that. And it was kind of funny. 2 days ago, I think I stumbled across some film project and said from the best-selling comic series, and I was like, I've never heard of this. What am I that out of it? So I researched and I Googled, and I eventually finally found a page that talked about the comic that this low budget movie was done from. And I'm like, I don't know where this was best selling, maybe in their living room, but they had used the right PR words, and they got a low budget movie produced from it. So clearly there was an element of this being produced specifically to try and break into Hollywood. And 35 years ago, nobody had any concept that would be where we're going. You talk about Uber producer Michael Uslan, or Uslan, sorry, who I said Uber and then I was like Uslan. Michael Uslan, licensed the rights to Swamp Thing and Batman and a couple other characters back in the late 60s or 70s, and struggled for years and years and years to get a single Batman movie made. And then you look now and his name's on so many different projects, and that decision he made as a young man, and that license that he got that the comic book company thought was essentially worthless, is now a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar franchise.
That's where we are now, though, right?
Right. And I, one of these days, I hope that'll be it for me. I just did this year I had a series come out. I put a couple things over here in case I needed to grab them, but I did this series called Fractured Fairy Tales for Abdo Press, and it's basically traditional fairy tales told in absolutely modern contexts. And there's 6 of them. They're very multicultural. They're very much about teens today. And, there was a part of me as I was writing it that I was saying, this is exactly the type of thing that could be a TV series. This could be adapted very easily into that. And because it's owned by Abdo, I'd be lucky to get my name on it. But those creators who own their own creations, they're actually reaping the rewards. I mean, Robert Kirkman now, reaps the rewards every time something from Walking Dead comes out.
Yep.
I personally am holding out for Robert Kirkman to get a Battle Pope series going, because that's my favorite work of
the big
his
compendium
ever.
of it. Oh, love that series. Love
Yes.
it.
Yes. Somebody
Yeah.
make that happen.
Yes.
It's like The Secret. We've put it out into the universe now. It's got to happen, right?
Right.
It's going to happen. We're going to see the first trailer of it in like a year and a half. It'll be in theaters in like 3 years. Done. It's done. It's out there. It's done.
I'm hoping so.
I'm buying the first ticket in one of the theaters here.
Right.
So, Andy, one of the things that has come out of this, and you helped us with this, is that the experience is partnering with Prism Comics to expand on our Pride event that we're having this weekend, and expanding Pride Month, and then having that conversation, continuing that conversation going forward with them as a partner. You've been involved in the LGBTQ plus part of the comic book industry for a really long time. So tell me about how
it was called that. Yeah. What did you say? What was the last part?
Well, I missed your part.
Oh, I said before it was called that. I mean,
well, there you go.
Back when I came out of the industry, and I was the first openly gay mainstream creator. There were underground creators who were creating content, but I mean, hell, there was a comic called Gay Comics, but it was an underground comic, and it was not something that most comic stores carried, and a lot of the creators were really minimized, and their careers were not advanced by them being in that. But in terms of somebody who worked for Marvel and DC and major independents, I was the first openly gay person. I wrote an article back in '88, I think it was, called Out of the Closet and Into the Comics for Amazing Heroes magazine. And it was a 2-part, 30-some page article that really examined how do comics treat gay and lesbian characters, and how do they treat their gay and lesbian creators. And at that point, literally nobody would use their own name if they were queer in the comic industry in this article. Everybody is unnamed sources, an unnamed colorist, an unnamed artist, an unnamed writer, an unnamed editor, etc. And at the very end of the article, I came out. And through the years have continued kind of the involvement I've had with that realm, because it was important to me that be something that be fought for, that somebody would stand up to the comic companies and say it's important to recognize LGBTQ characters. And again, this is before LGBTQ was a thing. When I started, it was just the gay community. Then it was the gay and lesbian community. Then it was the lesbian and gay community. Then lesbian, gay, bi, and eventually all these other elements were recognized, rightfully so. And but what I was doing was going to the companies and going to the editors and going to the other writers and creators and saying, why are you not featuring gay characters? And so as I talk about this, if I say gay, I of course mean LGBTQ, but I would ask these questions. Why is it that in Superman we can have a character that's supposed to be lesbian, but at the very moment that Superman is about to say she's a lesbian, a flying bat child flies by, and he's like, oh, a flying bat child, and doesn't say that Maggie Sawyer is a lesbian. Everything was coded and everything was hidden, and Marvel Comics actually had a rule that there were no gays in the Marvel universe, and that came from the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And so I was consistently trying to fight that and trying to get representation, not just for the characters, which would help the audience, but also for the creators themselves. And I founded with San Diego Comic-Con that same year that I wrote that article. I did the first Gays in Comics panel at Success. this actually tomorrow I'm recording the 34th year of, it's now called Out in Comics, and it's the 34th. It's the world panel.
So
from a place of, I had to scramble to find people who would agree to be on it who were queer, to now I am saying, okay, which one among these 70 or 80 queer creators who are actively creating comic content right this moment that's on the bookshelves, which ones of them am I going to use, and how do I represent the lovely, colorful panoply of what we have out there, and make sure that as many people are represented as possible.
got to bring that alphabet mafia, man.
Yeah. And eventually I did become, I became editor of Gay Comics, and I was editor of Gay Comics, I think, for 8 years. This was the final issue. One of the things I did as editor was I said 50% of the work is going to be by women or female identified creators, and we're going to add trans creators, and I really looked to find creators of color and things like that. So these are things that we think of as being kind of modern steps, and really they're less than 25 years old in terms of actual steps forward in the industry, but they're not. DC's Pride book comes out this week. Marvel's book comes out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
What amazes me and astonishes me is that these books exist in any form whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because I have been fighting for so long to get them to even acknowledge, and then to have it go from that to where there's actually now LGBTQ editors who are hiring LGBTQ creators to work on an anthology at the same companies that said there were no gay characters and use the words gay and lesbian. It's a startling transition. Unfortunately, I got left out of all of that. Mind you, and it's because I'm too old. I'm relevant to the scene, but really, I think that there are a lot of people who feel like we've got to have fresh and new, and it's got to be creators who have something brand new and fresh to say. Hey, Nick. Nick was one of the people. Nick has been a big supporter of me over the years, and has done some things that have helped me out when I've been having some really difficult times. And of course, Nick, published Wonder Woman 77 Meets the Bionic Woman as a co-publishing with DC. But and there's other editors and publishers that have really kind of stood by me over the years. I want to call out David Campiti, who was at a company called Innovation Comics. And back in the 90s, David recognized the place I was at, that intersection of comics and Hollywood. And he was like, if you want to work for us, we will absolutely use you to every thing you can get. And I got them the licensing rights to Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play and Quantum Leap and Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows was one of these things that at the time I got the licensing rights for it, Marvel was trying to get it, DC was trying to get it, 3 or 4 other companies were trying to get it, and I got it for Innovation Comics, this little, smaller studio. But Dave Campiti stood by every time I said, "Hey, why are we not featuring more characters of color in the comics? Let's add more characters of color. Let's have more female protagonists. Let's feature some early queer content." And that was actually I wrote an issue of the Quantum Leap comic called Up Against a Stone Wall. And if you guys remember what Quantum Leap was, he would leap. It was a scientist from the future who would his soul would leap into the body of somebody in the past to right what once went wrong. And the TV show had only once addressed LGBTQ issues, and in that episode they had a lesbian murderer, who was so angry at her lover she murdered her, and he leaped into the body of the person who helped put her in prison. And I said, okay, that, number one, that's just repeating the trope that gays are all killers, which was very common at the time in Hollywood. But I said, number two, you've got this is something that once went wrong. Let's write what once went wrong. And so I went to Innovation and I said, let me do a story about this set the week of the Stonewall riots, which were the start of the modern gay rights movement. And so they did that, but then the question was, would Universal Studios know it? Because it was a licensed comic and they had control over everything that was there. And to their credit, when somebody, myself, stood up and said, hey, let's fix this thing that was a problem. How that to happen. I wrote an editorial in the issue about how negative and how dangerous that episode had been and what it was and the effects that it had on the community. And so not only did Dave Campini publish that and it got national press and everything else, but by somebody just saying, hey, why can't we make this better? Universal Studios changed their policy, So oftentimes in the 35-year journey that I've had as the first openly gay mainstream creator, I've been in a place where if I was the only voice, and I wasn't always the only voice, but if I was, it was at least one voice who was saying to them, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you correcting this? Why aren't you doing this? And it's one of the things about activism today that is so astonishing and wonderful to see. When I see the peaceful protests that are out there, and I see so many people raising their voices about the injustices and the inequalities and so forth, and so many people who are screaming to be heard. That's fantastic. I've been saying that in the comic industry for years. On my panel, I always end it by saying, if you want to see LGBTQ characters, tell the publishers that. Tell the writers that. When you go and get an autograph from your favorite comic writer, your favorite comic artist, tell them that you would love to see an LGBTQ character. When you are out there working with the publishers, tell them you want to see that. When these books come out, buy them. Because that's how we affect change in a positive way. If we're vocal about it, if it's clear that there is an inequality going on, most people will try to fix an inequality. I believe most people are good enough that they will do that. Whether they agree with it or not is immaterial. If they see an inequality, most people are humane enough and they have enough empathy that they will try to fix that inequality, even if they don't agree with it. As we've seen over the last 4 years, there are a lot of people who don't fit that category, who lack empathy and who lack humanity. But we've also seen an outpouring of people who say, this isn't necessarily my thing, or I don't understand everything about it, but what's happening is wrong. And that contributes to change just as much as people standing up and shouting, this is wrong. Changing minds one at a time, changing voices and being heard all comes from somebody saying, hey, there's a problem here, let's fix it. Here's how to fix it. Having that conversation. Sorry, I'm making wind up for you. You asked me a question, I'm like, blah!
Yeah. No, and I love it. And it's so, you know, I love it when somebody comes on here and just spits knowledge and speaks truth.
Yeah.
Because it makes it easier for me as a person who is a host of things to just be like, yeah, let's talk more about that thing. But I did want to mention something. You know, it's one of those, as you mentioned it, is the role of the ally has been really important and increasingly out there, as it were.
Right.
You know, it's we come to this weekend and I'm not a member of the community of LGBTQIA creators, but I'm an ally.
Right.
And so it's, how can I support the people that I love who make great work by supporting them through the other parts of the life that they're living.
Right. And that gets to be, I mean, it's an interesting question. When we're talking the real world, allies are the bodies and things that help get things done. When we're talking the comic world, as far as creators, allies are the ones who can be inclusive and can say, one of the things I challenge creators to do all the time is I always say, when you are creating a story, think about, and you're creating your characters, think about, why does this character have to be another cisgender white male? Because that's the default that most people have. I'm not picking on The Walking Dead, because I really respect it. But, you know, why did Rick Grimes have to be a white cisgender male? What if he had been Michonne at the start? And what if Michonne had been, you know, the Rick Grimes character? And then when the black female Rick Grimes came along and met Michonne, the white male, that would have been revolutionary, you know. But these are the types of things that we have to ask those questions of people. And as people realize there's that imbalance, that they start asking themselves. And I was the co-writer. This is my Star Trek book, Section 31 Rogue. And it was the first Star Trek project that majorly featured a gay character as the star of the story. And it really broke a lot of barriers for books and comics and in the Star Trek realm, and how they would and could treat LGBTQ characters. It didn't affect the TV show because the producer at the time was, in my opinion, standing in the way of progress. But it did affect the comics, and it did affect the books, and it did affect licensing and things like that. One of the writers groups I was in, I related that story, and I said, look at the progress that has been made by me and my co-writer standing up and saying, we're going to do this. And the editor supporting it, and the publisher supporting it, and somebody in their licensing department making sure that no matter what stood in the way of it, it got cleared, you know, and it happened. And I says, as each of you are creating your next projects, ask yourself why it can't be a black woman in this, why it can't be a person with a handicap, why it can't be an LGBTQ character. And one of the writers in there was working on the Mandalorian books, speaking Boba Fett again. She was working on the Mandalorian books for Lucasfilm, and she says, you know, have there been any gay Star Wars characters? And I says, no. I said, I was going to write the first one, and then that project fell through. And she says, well, I'll do it. And she made the two leads of her Mandalorian books a couple, a male couple. and there was among sections, but then it was there and it was accepted. Broke, and now creators are able to say, I can create a character that has tentacles on their heads, or I can create a character with 4 arms, or I can create a lesbian or a LGBTQ character. No longer a problem to do this. So in terms of that question, else. In terms of the fans, how are allies supportive and how are fans supportive? And that is by your pocketbook.
Yep, all about the money.
By your voice. If these anthologies that DC and Marvel are doing sell as well as they're hoping they will, then we're going to probably see them as quickly as we might otherwise. If they, interestingly, if they get a pouring of hate about it, will energize the people who are actively working for better representation. I mean, that's the weird flip on Gate is that by them being such hateful miscreants and horrible people, they are actually energizing everyone else to stand up and say, you know what? We are not going to let them win. We will fight to our last ounce to make sure that their hate and their anger and their troglodytism doesn't win.
Their hate gives you motivation.
And it's motivation. And it sucks that we have to spend our energy doing that, fighting for equality, fighting for better representation. But the weird part about Comicsgate and those type of trolls is that it energizes those of us who are in that community and those people who are allies. It energizes them to say, yeah, we still need to have this fight. We still need to have this conversation. We still need to feature this. And it becomes more and more on creators' minds as they're coming up with stories. When Marvel started doing socially relevant stories and DC started doing socially relevant stories, they were writing stories that were relevant to the times. When Gene Roddenberry, featured mixed race kisses on Star Trek, when he featured a Russian on the bridge of the Enterprise at the height of the Cold War, that was revolutionary.
We're not allowed to watch that in Russia, by the way.
Oh, really?
Wow. No, we weren't allowed to watch it because it was they thought that we were being made fun of on the show, so they just didn't air it. That was during the Cold War, it was during the 90s, early 2000s. So they didn't air it because they seriously thought it was America's way of making fun of us. Wow. It wasn't until I moved here in the early 2000s and I sat down and I finally got to watch it. I loved it so much. I watched every episode in a week and every movie. And I was just like, wait a minute. That's not how we say. That's not what you say. No. And it's just like I was just sitting there like yelling at my screen, like, no. Here I was, just like 10-year-old Jenna, just like, no. Go on. Just yelling at the screen.
That all came from, Gene Roddenberry was a white cisgender heterosexual man who had been a police officer. about as restrictive and closed a circle as you can get when it comes to progressivism. And but it was the fact that he had empathy and humanity within him that when he was creating this show and this property, that he was saying, no, I need to not just reflect this, that he actually used his experiences out in the world as a police officer, that he actually used them to say, I want to feature people of different nationalities. I want to feature a cashless economy that isn't about greed. I want to feature characters of color that are treated as equals and that can have full lives just like the white characters do. And so he is a perfect example of an ally. And at that time, he was an ally to people of color. He was an ally to Russians. He was an ally to a lot of liberal storytelling, what we think of as liberal storytelling now. And really it was, I hesitate to call it liberal storytelling. I say it was progressive or truthful storytelling. Gene Roddenberry is the perfect example of what an ally should be, of somebody who says, I have the power to address this. And even though it's not my experience, I have the power to do something about this. Kyle, you've identified yourself as heterosexual, but you're hosting this and you're working to advance this dialogue. Jena, I don't know what you are. Wonderful. But you're working to advance this dialogue, and you did it with the Black experience that you did a couple months ago, and I think you just did an Asian one, did you not?
API was just last weekend. Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful. Those types of things amplify the voices of the people who otherwise wouldn't have that amplification or would have to fight for it. I can get on and do my own podcast, and I can do this and I can do that and so forth, but boy, it's sure nice when other people say, I'm going to do it too, and I want to hear your voice.
It
takes a little bit of that pressure off.
I have a mantra in my own life, and it's fine. And the mantra is literally just the word "find your voice." And I was very lucky very early on to find my voice, which is that I am incredibly confident in myself. So that lets me give that confidence to other people. Let me stand next to you when you're feeling less confident and help you find your voice.
Right.
And so, not that confidence is necessarily an issue here, but it's when you are feeling less heard, when you're feeling less seen, when you're feeling less whatever, let me stand next to you. And two people together are stronger than any one individual. So it's that kind of mentality that I bring to this event and to any event we do. Is it's how do we have the conversations we need to be having so that our community as a whole, the comic book community, as well as the LGBTQIA community, as well as the Asian community, as well as the Black indie community, as well as whoever, are getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger to the point where now it's an immovable object.
Yep.
It's a total force for change rather than just a thing that people like. I don't know if that's a true,
definitely feels like
it's a false equilibrium, but that's what I mean is if we can get the boulder to be really big, rolling in that right direction,
there's
then
no way to stop it.
It doesn't matter what's in the way or who tries to slow it down. It just is going to get where it's going.
Right.
Get where it needs to
I always like to do the facts part of it. I've always got 1,000 notes, and I'm like, oh, you want to know more? I know all about you. Here's you. You're amazing. You do you.
Right.
I'm here to show you the facts that you are amazing. And that's just
right.
That's how I found my voice.
Right.
So we have a few minutes left. Jena, you went off and researched Andy in our break. What did you find about Andy that's interesting in your facts?
He loves X-Files,
right?
Star Wars, Star Trek, which, as we've seen and we've talked about, Wonder Woman. I kind of want to know more about how you got into working with Dark Horse. There's always a story.
Well, that's a slightly touchy subject.
Oh, okay.
I actually, at the time when I moved to Portland, I was 18. I had my bachelor degree, and I moved to Portland. I was not out, and I started working. I applied at all the comic book stores to work, and one of them would not give me a job because they thought I was an idiot because they gave me a alphabetization test, because they also had science fiction paperbacks. And they said, alphabetize this by author. And so I put M.A. in front of M.C. And in their mind, M.C., McDonald, came before whoever it was that was M.A.
What?
And because it was a little, I don't know.
I'm so like,
that's not how letters work.
Right. So anyhow, so they didn't hire me because they thought I was irredeemably stupid. The 18-year-old with a college degree was irredeemably stupid because I put MA in front of MC. But whatever. Anyhow, I did get hired by Mike Richardson at Pegasus Books and Comics, which was a chain of comic stores that he ran. And in the process of working there, he started Dark Horse Comics around the store.
Oh.
And there were creators who shopped at the store, or wannabe creators who he utilized for Dark Horse Comics. I actually only worked with them twice, with the Boba Fett comic that I did, and a couple other, one other minor thing that never actually saw print because the book got canceled. But I worked at their retail store for several years until I left, interestingly, because the manager was homophobic. And once I came out, that became an issue. And at that point in time, I had conversations with Mike Richardson and so forth about what this meant. But this was in the 80s, and things were very different then, and language was very different, and how people talked about things was very different. And you had to be, as one of the few people who was out that anybody knew, there was a year that I went to Comic-Con, and I took my husband, my partner at the time, and introducing him to people was even a question. Do I say he's my boyfriend? But he's more than that. So do I use the word lover, which was the common parlance at the time? And I was told, no, don't use the word lover because it makes people think of your sex life. And I says, well, I can't use the word husband because we aren't married, because we're not allowed to get married. So this conversation was had with people about, how do I introduce this guy? Yeah. And I was eventually basically told, well, you should be using the word partner. And I'm like, you have a partner. He runs the company with you. That person has a partner in their law firm. This is not my partner. But
your life partner is what they wanted us to say.
Yeah, but that language wasn't around at that point. So anyhow, so I did do a couple of jobs for Dark Horse, but I also, there's some negative things about that past history. But I'm so glad to see that a lot of those things have been addressed as Dark Horse has grown as a company. Just like everybody, there are people who start out at point A. Only the stupid people stay at point A. People who are intelligent will progress, and they'll change, and they'll modify their thinking as humanity moves forward. And I've seen Dark Horse do that. They have a book out now called Killer Queens.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited.
You had David Booher on, who wrote it before you.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
A flying monkey with a jetpack. I'm so excited. And the hench otters.
Yeah, and hench otters, yes.
Hench otters!
The henchmen are otters.
I'm so excited. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to dress up my dog as a hench otter.
You said a bunch of questions, and I'm like, okay, we don't have much time. Let's zip through them.
Okay, no. There's not a whole lot. You pretty much covered everything. There was one more question. Is there what's your favorite indie book that's out right now that you're enjoying reading? I'm all the hard hitting questions, right?
Just ask him to pick his favorite Wonder Woman costume or something.
I could say pick your favorite Star Wars.
Favorite child.
You go there.
Boy, that puts me on the spot because right now I am like struggling to read anything.
Okay.
I'm a caregiver, for disabled and elderly people. That's my day job. And then at night, I'm trying to write as much as possible. So I read as often as I can, and I still do read comics, but I tend to read things by creators. Like Cena Grace is somebody who I love reading anything by him. Robert Kirkman is someone whose voice I really love. My brain is blanking on his name. The guy who wrote the Snagglepuss Chronicles and Flintstones.
That's gonna bug me now.
Yeah. See?
Oh, I know. I've seen those comics. Yeah.
And so I'll read a lot of his stuff. When James Robinson was more in the industry, I read a lot of him. I love the artwork of Colleen Duran, so I'll follow anything she does. Eric Shanauer, I tend to like
Mark Russell.
Thank you. There are a lot of creators out there, and Portland has an enormous amount of comic creators. And so, I'll be like, when we could go to conventions, I would be at the conventions and I'd be like, okay, give me this book and this book and this book and this book, because it's all these people who I know and I love them, so I'm going to give their work an opportunity. And that's one of the things about that the internet has done, and comic conventions they have become more popular, is that people now know creators.
Yeah.
They have the opportunity to know about them. People ask about my dog. They ask about my husband.
I was kind of hoping to see your dog today too.
Yeah. They ask about things on my bookshelves, and I'm like, how do you know this? And they're like, well, I was watching this podcast and I saw you had, this. And so people now have a relationship with comic creators that they didn't ever used to. And so I think we're going to see even more of that, where people will identify with and will appreciate works by creators as opposed to just the books. So I would say,
I'm kind of guilty. I usually look at who the artist is. I'm a huge, because I paint at home. So it's like I look for art. Like Mercy from Mirka Andolfo was amazing. Like the art style that she did with the sort of almost just it was amazing. And then Stray Dogs has this sort of like Disney-esque look to it, but they're telling such a horror story with it. So it's been super amazing. All right, can you tell us where we can find you on social media?
On social media, I am on Twitter, but I'm not really on Twitter. I don't think I've made more than 5 posts. But I do. I have a website, which is andymangels.com. You can see my name over there.
Yeah, there we go.
It's andymangels.com. Just always remember, it's like angels with an M in front of it. So you don't misspell it. andymangels.com is the best place to find me. There's a lot of examples of my work there. There's an exhaustive list of materials. You can also find me at wonderwomanmuseum.com. I do have the world's largest Wonder Woman collection. We're trying to get that into the Guinness Book of World Records. I'm hoping by this time next year I will actually have 2 world records, one being the world's largest Wonder Woman collection, and the other being the world's longest running comic book panel, which is the Out in Comics panel. And then at Prism Comics, prismcomics.org, which I was one of the founders of that organization. And they're a fantastic organization that not only supports LGBTQ creators and books, but also LGBTQ fans. And so you can find.
We're very excited to be working with them.
Yeah,
we're very excited to be working with Prism. That's going to really, I think it's going to be a great partnership for everybody. It's going to really help us expand this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
So, if you're for those of you out there watching, Andy will be back tomorrow.
Ooh.
But he will be in Jenna and I's chair.
Oh.
Where he will be talking to a legendary creator, Jose Villarrubia.
Ooh, I'm so excited.
Jose is a fantastic guy and has been. Yeah. Jose's fantastic.
So,
and I hope to continue the conversations as we keep going.
Absolutely.
also tomorrow, you won't see it for a month, but as I said, I'm recording the 34th Out in Comics panel. And although I love you guys, there is a huge announcement that will be happening at the end of that panel. So a month from now, be sure to check the 34th annual Out in Comics panel, and there will be an enormous announcement there.
Yes.
We're okay. We got breaking news about
the Hinge
in
Otters
our first panel.
Yes.
So we're good with that's about our level. So
Okay.
So everybody, if you're watching on the experience right now, which you have to be because that's the only place we are, stay tuned in about 5 minutes from now, and we will see Nick for the Comics Collectibles with Dynamic Forces show. We have a piece of art available tomorrow or tonight, where all the proceeds will go to the Trevor Project as a part of our celebration here of Pride Month on the experience. So thank you to Andy. Thank you to Jenna for helping me out. We will be back tomorrow starting at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, with more great conversations and a continuation of our celebration of Pride here on the experience. So we'll see everybody
We'll see that,
then.
as they say, live long and prosper.
Bye.